Hello, I'm Alex. Welcome to my channel. So today I have a story for you. It is about a Jesse McFadden. This happened in Oklahoma. Have you heard about this? The situation where this relatively unknown guy, he was hiding his background and he married his way into this family. This horrible situation had occurred because he didn't disclose certain things. He didn't really look back at what he had done in the past. And you'll see in this video why that is so important. So what I'll do is I'll chronologically go from the beginning to the end and give some of my opinion along the way. So stay tuned. Jesse McFadden, 5 foot 6 inches. We don't know a whole lot about him, but we do know that he has a brother that's currently serving time in prison. And we'll get to that later, but for now, for this story, we're going to start with his first run-in with the law. This story begins with Jesse McFadden's relationship with a particular woman that was friends with someone by the name of Crystal Strong. Crystal Strong was a woman that Jesse was interested in. And of course, you know, with any kind of interest in anybody, there's not always reciprocating feelings. And in this case, it was repulsion. She was completely repulsed by him, thought that he was disconcerting, and he was coming off in the worst way possible. Despite all the pushback on Crystal's part with regard to Jesse, that didn't seem to deter him at all. He kept on pursuing relentlessly, and on one fateful night, there was a cake party over at her house. This guy shows up again, and you can imagine Crystal was thinking, not this guy again. But he was there, right, with the other party goers there, and they ended up all leaving. And Jesse came back around 3 a.m. He broke into the home and binded Crystal, put a sock in her mouth. She could just imagine she's terrified. And he's threatening her life. And she pleaded for her life. She was thinking, okay, how am I going to get out of this? So what she did is she said that she'll destroy some of that evidence after he had his way with her to basically help him get away with it. But I'm sure you can think that she's not trusting this guy. She's got to do whatever she can to get away from the situation, which is smart. So when Crystal had the chance, she bolted out of there. She was running for her life, and she didn't even care. She didn't have any clothes on. She got to the neighbor, who then alerted the police. So thankfully, she had police. She had help before Jesse was going to do anything else. And then at that point, when the police got there, Jesse fled. They ended up finding him over by the river somewhere, and he had self-harmed himself. Probably because he thought that, oh, this is it. I'm in a lot of trouble now. And as you would expect, the law had some consequences for Jesse McFadden. That in 2003, he was convicted of first-degree R and sentenced to 20 years in an Oklahoma prison. Leading up to his sentencing, he wrote a letter to the judge. And if you read some of the excerpts on here, there seems to be a theme in which he's somewhat absolving himself from the crime, and he's downplaying it, and he's saying he's this young guy, he's got his life ahead of him, and he will not do that kind of stuff again. Unfortunately, he should have thought about that before committing what almost could have been murder. And after the trial and the sentencing, McFadden was off to prison. And during his time in prison, he met someone by the name of James Fleming. James Fleming was his cellmate for about 16 months, and he was in there for burglary. Nothing violent in the same way that Jesse was in there for. During these 16 months, Jesse and James had this relationship. Not the healthiest of relationships, according to James. He claimed that he was always trying to breach his boundaries, and that he felt that if he weren't physically or mentally strong, he probably would have R-ed him. In addition to James feeling uncomfortable with him, Jesse was also running amok around the prison. And one particular staff member, a female, she was being harassed and rubbed up against by this Jesse. And on top of that, he ended up sneaking a contraband cell phone into prison. I don't know how he did that. I know in prison they usually do trading, maybe he traded some cigarettes or some other contraband item in order to get one of those. And the worst part about him having the cell phone is he was using it to collect illicit images of a minor girl who was around 15 years old. The girl on the other end of the cell phone, her name is Caitlin Babb. She was a girl that was feeling lonely, had moved to a new town, and somehow she gets this call from this Jesse figure. He starts talking with her using his manipulation, and she is completely swooned by him somehow. Don't ask me how. It seemed like he knew exactly what to say to get Caitlin to basically swoon for him. And at one time, they were writing letters through the mail, and you would think that maybe the prison's supposed to read this, but of course they don't know what her age is over a letter. Jesse ended up getting in trouble eventually because one of these letters were taken by the grandparents of Caitlin. Upon the authorities receiving this letter, you better believe Jesse's in trouble. They confiscate his phone, they find all the images, and he's already in there for being a predator and having to register as an offender. And he also has this hanging over his head that's going to add even more time to his sentence. Somehow, again, Jesse was able to make contact with Caitlin again, and in his manipulative ways, he was getting Caitlin to go all the way to the police station to try to drop all these charges. And of course, it doesn't make any sense. You would think that if the charges are there, she's not really the one making the charges. Later on, I don't know how this happened, but Jesse got released from prison. He ended up only serving 17 out of the 20 years, despite this potential conviction hanging over his head. Leading up to Jesse's release from prison, Caitlin ceased communications with him. The reason for this, she feared for her life. She thought this was a bad guy, that he had manipulated her, and that she saw the light now. That she saw that he was a perpetrator and that she was the victim. And she didn't really want to be meeting this guy and have him potentially off her, if you know what I mean. Despite there being no more communication between him and Caitlin, he ended up seemingly moving on. He got with someone by the name of Holly Guess. I have no idea, but it seems like they had a whirlwind romance because very shortly they had gotten married. Just imagine, you have this new guy, Jesse McFadden, married into the family. They have no idea who this guy is. He didn't say anything about his history. He lied about going to prison. They don't know any of this stuff. What makes this really bad is that Jesse McFadden had this history. He was an offender and she had children. So just see that. That's not a good combination. I can only imagine when Holly found out about Jesse's background that she was horrified. Not only that, he completely downplayed everything once she found out. According to reports, he was saying, oh, it was a misunderstanding, it wasn't that bad, and so maybe somehow he was able to convince her to stick around just from that. Other family members related to Holly, they didn't really like this guy. They thought he was weird, that he was controlling, that he was always looking in the children's phones, always keeping tabs of them. There was something just not right with this guy. As the future approaches, Jesse McFadden's next court date is getting closer. You know that one conviction looming over his head with regard to those illicit images transferred over his cell phone while he was in prison? This involved Caitlin Babb. Remember way back when she was being manipulated by him to go to the authorities to drop the charges? At this point, she was all going forward with these charges. She was going to testify, she was going to do all these things to make sure that this guy was back in prison. So not only do you have Caitlin Babb, you have Crystal Strong, and you also have the other individual, James Fleming. He was telling authorities, don't let this guy out. He's a sick puppy. What is he doing out? As the court date is even getting closer, Jesse is very adamant about getting Caitlin Babb to drop the charges. As you can see in this particular screenshot, he's messaging what appears to be from Holly's account, and he just has this weird picture where he's staring at her, and the synopsis here is that he's blaming her for about what's to happen. She doesn't really know what's about to happen. Nonetheless, she sends this over to authorities so they can archive it for their investigation. This leads us to the last weekend of April 2023 in a home in Henrietta, Oklahoma. Holly Guess, her children, they want to have a sleepover. So what they do is they invite two of their friends over for the weekend. And by Sunday evening, you're supposed to have the two friends return home. These two teenagers, the ones that were visiting over at the home, the parents, they had no idea about this Jesse McFadden and what the kind of mess he was in. This guy had a pending trial coming up, and he was over there while they were having a sleepover. I mean, you can only imagine if they knew, they wouldn't have allowed that to happen. As Sunday finally arrived, the two teenagers that were visiting for that sleepover never came home. The parents were worried, and of course, they did the right thing. They alerted authorities and filed a missing person report. As you can see on this image, this is what they had released at that time. Unfortunately, on Monday, May 1st, 2023, authorities went over to the home of the McFaddens and the Guesses. There was a gruesome discovery, and all of the people who were at the sleepover, including Holly, were dead. They thought maybe Jesse could have been there, but he was there dead too. It was apparent that he had offed himself in what appeared to be an orchestrated scene in which all of these things were positioned in such a way that said basically, F this, F everybody. It was horrific. He not only desecrated the bodies, later reports showed DNA and bodily fluids on the bodies. It was a complete desecration. The authorities didn't release a lot of evidence information what happened there because they said it was just so horrific, but they did say that there were gunshot wounds to the back of the head. As you're all thinking, how did this guy weasel himself into this situation? How did he do it? And I'm really feeling sorry for Holly. I know a lot of people blame Holly, but she didn't know. She didn't know. She didn't only knew to the end, and he was such a good manipulator that she really didn't know what was coming. Or maybe she did. It's hard to say, because there's not really enough accounts about how much she knew or how much of an apparent danger was really there in her mind. And another thing, the biggest thing, you have James Fleming, you have Caitlin Babb, and you also have Bristol Strong. They were all sounding the alarm. They said, don't let this guy out. He shouldn't have been out in the first place. Because he had this conviction looming over his head in prison, they should have just added on to his sentence. There was really no good reason that he should have been released at all. At least keep him in there until those charges are figured out. Thanks for watching my video. I do appreciate you taking the time. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos to come. And don't forget to comment below on any insight that you have into this case and also any other related cases. All right, well, I'll see you next time. See you later.